Well, I think there's something that Republicans and Democrats can agree on, and that is that none of us likes gun violence. Nobody likes innocent people being murdered. Ed Vitagliano, Walker Wildman, Abraham Hamilton III. Walker, in light of the fact that we've had a couple of what's called mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder, Atlanta, Georgia, Boulder, Colorado, and then the every weekend violence in some of our major cities, the president came out today and basically said he wants to address this through executive order.
Yeah, what the Biden administration is doing here, and it's rather dangerous, and that is they are trying to loop in, quote, gun violence or shootings as a public health emergency or a public health crisis, which, as we've seen the past 12 months, opens up the government's powers and authorities to go really far beyond what the typical executive orders are set up for. So that's one area that's really disturbing, is that they're trying to brand this. Brand is not really a good word, but they're trying to label this as a public health emergency, even though in reality, crime is not necessarily always a public health emergency.
And like I said in the introduction, we all are shocked when some of these violent outbreaks occur, and nobody wants gun violence. Everyone's opposed to it. The question is, what do we do about it?
Right.
And that's where Republicans and Democrats, conservatives, liberals, the far left disagree. Constitutionally, there are limits to what the federal government is supposed to be able to do. But as we have seen in the last year, but also over the last 60 years, we have now an issue with both Republican and Democratic presidents. We have an issue with the expansion of federal power, and whether or not Republicans and Democrats can agree or disagree on what we might be able to do to stop some of the violence that's being committed with guns, there are supposed to be constitutional limits, right?
Yeah, there are constitutional limits on the federal government's power generally, and even more particularly, there's a constitutional separation of powers to keep American presidents from acting as if they are American kings. You know, it was a small war right around the 1700s. Maybe you can remind me what it was that helped us get rid of the trappings of a king.
Right.
But what we're finding, more and more people who are in favor of bigger and bigger government, they seem more and more willing to eviscerate constitutional limitations on power and even to shred the constitutional separation of power in an effort to congeal power in one source. And that's something that the Founding Fathers expressly repudiated. And this idea of governing by executive order is just fundamentally a violative of the U.S. Constitution. And so it's amazing that whenever these things happen, government very rarely gets to the root of the matter, because it's not constituted to address heart issues, because there's never going to be a law that is going to cause criminals to all of a sudden become non-criminals. Whenever you restrict the rights of American citizens to keep and bear arms, the only people you're hindering are, generally speaking, by and large, law-abiding, freedom-loving citizens. Criminals don't tend to pay attention to laws.
Well, folks, I can't think of anything more heartbreaking than to say goodbye to a loved one in the morning, thinking you're going to see them at night, and have them gunned down in some act of random violence or intentional violence, in the case of drive-by shootings sometimes. The question is, what do we do to stop it? And what we're seeing from the Biden administration with these new proposals by executive order, but also what President Biden has said he wants to do in the future, causes law-abiding citizens a great deal of alarm, because we're wondering what the federal government, in its desire to grab more and more power, intends for constitutionally protected rights in the future. We're going to continue to follow this issue, and as all Americans will, and so we'll talk about it in future episodes of Reason and Company. We appreciate you joining us for this one.